Defcon 5. Picture a quiet Tuesday morning at a stateside air base. Cargo planes are doing pattern work, fighter squadrons are flying training sorties, kids are walking to school in base housing, and most people on the flight line are thinking about paperwork, not World War III. That ordinary day is what the United States calls Defense Readiness Condition 5, or Defcon 5. And understanding this boring setting is the only way to make sense of the scarier levels you see thrown around online. Defcon, short for Defense Readiness Condition, is the U.S. military's five-step ladder for how ready major commands need to be for large-scale war, especially nuclear war. It is ordered by the top of the chain of command, usually the President and Secretary of Defense on the advice of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and different commands can sit at different rungs at the same time. Defcon 5 is the baseline, normal peacetime readiness. Units train to their standard schedules, ships follow routine deployments, bombers and missile crews maintain strict safety and security standards, but they are not surged beyond the level needed to deter and respond to ordinary threats. In practical terms, Defcon 5 means checklists that emphasize maintenance, training, and long-term planning. Forces still have quick reaction elements, but they are sized and manned for everyday contingencies rather than a looming great power war. A bomber wing might have only a modest number of aircraft on short notice alert, while the rest are in deeper maintenance or training cycles. Nuclear command and control centers are staffed, but not flooded with additional crisis personnel. Why does this matter? Because when someone online shouts that we just went to Defcon 3, the claim only has meaning if you can picture what we are moving away from. Defcon 5 is the long, flat baseline of history. Much of the 1990s, many years between major crises, and most of the time even during regional conflicts that don't directly threaten U.S. territory. Think of Defcon 5 as the hum of fluorescent lights in a headquarters building on a normal day, and the next rung as the first sign that someone just turned those lights a little brighter. Defcon 4. Defcon 4 is that slight but deliberate brightening. It is still peacetime, still far from nuclear war, but the system has decided that the world is tense enough to justify increased vigilance. Official descriptions talk about above-normal readiness and heightened intelligence watch, and that phrase tells you the priority: watching more closely, not yet moving entire armies. At Defcon 4, checklists shift in ways the public might not notice, but people in uniform feel immediately. Intelligence and early warning centers increase staffing and shorten reporting timelines. Communications checks between commands happen more frequently, with backup circuits tested and verified. Bases may strengthen access control, run more random vehicle inspections, and quietly review evacuation or dispersal plans. Certain air and naval units might pre-position equipment, top off fuel, or adjust deployment schedules so they can surge faster if told to. Historically, variations of this posture have been common during long, uneasy periods of the Cold War and in the run-up to regional conflicts. Open histories describe U.S. commands operating at elevated readiness as crises simmered in Berlin, along the Korean demilitarized zone, or in the Middle East. In many of those cases, Defcon 4-style measures allowed the military to tighten its guard without creating the unmistakable signals that come with heavier moves, like mass bomber dispersals or submarine surges. The key thing to remember is that Defcon 4 is designed to be sustainable. A country can live there for weeks or months if needed. It is the equivalent of leaving a light on in the hallway and keeping your shoes by the door, not sleeping in full gear. From the outside, it may look almost identical to Defcon 5. Inside operation centers, though, clocks are watched more closely, reports are read with sharper eyes, and everyone understands that Defcon 3 is the next, more disruptive step if a crisis deepens. Defcon 3. Defcon 3 is where everyday life starts to change for real units and their families. One way to picture it is through a historical snapshot. October 1962, during the early days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when U.S. forces were ordered to increase readiness as Soviet missiles were discovered on the island. In many commands, that move meant more aircraft on alert, more ships ready to sail, and more people sleeping at work instead of at home. Officially, Defcon 3 represents a significant increase in force readiness above normal peacetime posture. In open descriptions, you will sometimes see it associated with air units capable of launching on very short notice and with major commands canceling non-essential travel and training. For a fighter wing, that might mean a large fraction of jets parked, fueled, armed, and tied into alert crews who can be in the cockpit in minutes. For a naval task force, it may mean ships moving to sea earlier than planned, ready to reposition quickly. Key command posts go to around-the-clock manning. We have seen public references to Defcon 3 during several major crises. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the United States raised its worldwide alert to signal the Soviet Union not to intervene directly against Israel. After the September 11, 2001 attacks, U.S. forces again moved to a higher state of readiness, with air defense units on high alert and additional forces prepared to respond quickly as the situation evolved. During the 1990–1991 Gulf War, U.S. forces in and around the Persian Gulf operated at elevated readiness, roughly equivalent to this level, as they prepared for the possibility of Iraqi use of weapons of mass destruction or attacks on allies. At this rung, families notice the change. Leaves are canceled. Aircraft that were supposed to deploy for training now sit loaded on the ramp, and base gates may be backed up as security procedures tighten. Adversaries notice it too, which is part of the point. A move to something like Defcon 3 is both practical and political. It genuinely shortens the time it would take to fight a major war, and it serves as a very visible signal that the United States takes a crisis seriously. There is an important caveat. The precise checklists for each Defcon level are largely classified, and many details vary by command and era. What we know comes from official doctrine summaries, declassified Cold War documents, and reputable histories, not from a public dashboard. By the time a region or command reaches something like Defcon 3, other alert ladders are moving in parallel. Force Protection Condition, or FP-SON, controls physical security at bases, while Information Operations Condition, often called InfoCon or CyberCon, does the same for computer networks. Together with Defcon, these overlapping ladders form a grid, one axis for how worried leaders are about major war, another for terrorism or cyber attacks, and a third for day-to-day security posture. Keep that grid in mind as we climb into Defcon 2, because the next rung is where the nuclear side of the house starts to drive almost everything else. Defcon 2. A useful mythbuster lives right at the entrance to Defcon 2. You may have seen a website claim the U.S. is at Defcon 2 because it changed a graphic or color. There is no official public meter that broadcasts the national Defcon level in real time, and as far as declassified records show, the United States has not put its entire military at Defcon 2. Even during intense moments like the Gulf War or after 9/11, publicly acknowledged alerts have not reached this rung across the board. Defcon 2 is defined as a further increase in force readiness, just short of maximum. In plain language, it is the next step to war. At this level, specific commands are expected to be able to deploy and fight on extremely short notice. War plans move from the binder to the front of the desk. Training stops being about generic readiness and becomes about the exact scenarios commanders think they may face in hours or days. The classic example is again the Cuban Missile Crisis. In late October 1962, the United States put Strategic Air Command, the organization responsible for long-range nuclear bombers and land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, at Defcon 2. That meant bomber crews on continuous alert rotations, aircraft loaded with nuclear weapons on runways and in the air, and missile crews sealed in their underground capsules. Other parts of the military stayed at lower levels, but the nuclear strike forces were one rung below maximum because leaders believed they might have to execute nuclear war plans if the crisis spun out of control. Checklist actions at Defcon 2 are the kind you take when you think war is likely but not yet inevitable. Forces. Disperse so that fewer aircraft and missiles can be destroyed in a surprise attack. Submarines carrying nuclear missiles surge to sea and take up their patrol boxes. Allied governments are warned more directly, and diplomatic channels are flooded with last-minute messages aimed at either deterring the other side or clarifying red lines. For the units involved, it can feel like living on a 24-hour cliff edge. Every phone ring might be the order that jumps you to the last rung. Even here, though, Defcon is about readiness, not about launch authority itself. Defcon 2 does not mean nuclear weapons are guaranteed to be used, or that someone has already pressed a button. It means the machinery is spun up so tight that if national leaders give that order, the forces responsible can act almost immediately. To understand what almost immediately could look like, we have to talk about the level that sits at the top of the ladder. Defcon 1. Defcon 1 is the level you know best from movies, but that the real world has never openly reached. It is maximum readiness, the point at which nuclear war is judged imminent or actually underway. Declassified histories and official statements strongly suggest that no U.S. command has ever been formally declared at Defcon 1, even at the worst moments of the Cold War. That absence is a sober fact. For all the near misses, the ladder's top rung has remained hypothetical. Because the detailed checklists are classified, we can only describe Defcon 1 in broad strokes based on doctrine and logic. If it were ordered, you would expect all three legs of the nuclear triad to be at their highest possible state of readiness. Land-based missiles would be fully prepared to launch on very short notice. Bomber aircraft would either already be airborne or sitting at the ends of runways with engines running. Ballistic missile submarines would be on secure communications watch, ready to receive and authenticate emergency action messages. Conventional forces would likely be dispersed and locked down to ride out attacks and support whatever comes after. Popular culture often frames Defcon 1 as missiles are already in the air, but the real system is more nuanced. Depending on the scenario and doctrine in place, Defcon 1 might be ordered because national leaders believe an enemy strike is inbound, because the United States is about to launch a massive response, or because a regional nuclear exchange has already begun and the rest of the posture must catch up. In any case, it is not a level you sit at for long. It is a sprint posture, meant for the most extreme hours of a crisis rather than days or weeks. There is another reason you will never see an official tweet announcing, "We are now at Defcon 1." Broadcasting real-time nuclear readiness would tell potential adversaries exactly how worried you are, reveal what you think you know about their plans, and risk panicking the public. That is why current national Defcon levels are classified, and why the public record fills in only decades later through declassified memos and histories. The trade-off is that rumor and speculation rush into the vacuum, which is how we end up with memes and unofficial Defcon trackers that quietly diverge from anything the real system is doing. If you stitch the latter back together, you get a realistic scale you can use to sanity check dramatic claims. Defcon 5 is routine peacetime, 4 is sustained extra vigilance, 3 is serious heightened readiness that changes daily life for units, 2 is the edge of war for specific commands, and 1 is the level we hope never to see, reserved for the very worst day imaginable. The next time you see someone online say we're at Defcon 2, you can ask yourself what you would expect to see in the real world. Are bombers dispersing, submarines surging, allies publicly warned? If not, the claim is probably heat, not light. And if you want to keep making sense of how these quiet systems shape big decisions, you can stick around for more breakdowns of the ladders, acronyms, and checklists that sit behind the headlines.